Hey there, welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I was around 10 years old when this happened, maybe a little younger, but old enough to be home alone during the day without it being considered a big deal. It was one of those quiet weekdays when school was out for some reason and my parents were both at work. The house felt familiar and safe, the way it always did in daylight. Nothing about that day felt strange or threatening at first. I remember feeling relaxed, probably doing something ordinary like reading, playing, or just wasting time in my room, the way kids do when they have the house to themselves. My bedroom was upstairs, and I had been there for a while, completely unaware of anything happening outside. Then, out of nowhere, the doorbell rang. It wasn't loud or aggressive at first, just a normal ring. Still, it caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting anyone. We didn't get many surprise visitors, especially during the day when everyone I knew was usually busy. The layout of the house is important to explain because it played a big role in what happened next. The staircase came straight down toward the front door, and right next to the door there were tall glass windows on both sides. Anyone standing outside could see into the entryway, and anyone inside could easily see who was at the door if they were careful. As a kid, I knew better than to just swing the door open. My parents had always told me to check first, to never open the door for someone I didn't know. So I quietly walked down the stairs, my footsteps slow and cautious. I didn't feel scared yet, just curious. I reached the landing and leaned slightly to the side. Just enough to peek around the corner and look through the glass without fully revealing myself. That was when I saw him. There was a grown man standing right outside the door, close enough that he was practically pressed up against the glass. He wasn't looking down the street or waiting patiently. He was staring straight into the house, his face turned toward the window like he was actively trying to see inside. The moment my eyes met him, my chest tightened. I hadn't expected to see anyone like that, and something about the way he was standing there immediately felt wrong. I must have made a noise without realizing it, maybe a sharp breath or a small gasp, because as soon as I pulled my head back to hide, everything changed. The calm of the moment shattered instantly. The man's hand slammed against the door, loud and sudden, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Before I could even process what was happening, he started shouting, "I see you in there!" His voice was loud, angry, and way too confident. It wasn't the voice of someone politely asking for help or trying to deliver something. It sounded aggressive, like he was challenging me. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt frozen for half a second, my body struggling to decide whether to run, hide, or scream. Then he banged on the door again, harder this time, his palm hitting the wood over and over. The sound felt violent, like he was trying to break his way in. He shouted again, repeating that he knew I was inside. Each word made my fear grow stronger. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely move. I ran. I don't even remember thinking about it. My body just reacted. I turned and bolted back up the stairs as fast as I could, my legs trembling, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I ran into my parents' bedroom because it felt like the safest place, the most familiar place, like being surrounded by their things might somehow protect me. I slammed the door shut behind me and stood there, listening. I could still hear him downstairs. The doorbell rang again, long and deliberate this time, then more pounding. He shouted again that he knew I was in there. Each sound felt like it was drilling straight into my head. I truly believed in that moment that he was going to break the door down. I didn't have a cell phone. This was before kids carried phones, before it was normal to be able to reach someone instantly. The house phone was downstairs, completely out of reach, and there was no way I was going anywhere near the front door again. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. The only person I could think to call was a neighbor up the street. She was a family friend, someone my parents trusted, someone who had told me before that I could call her if I ever needed help. I grabbed the phone in my parents' room and dialed her number with shaking fingers, praying she would answer. She didn't. The line just rang and then went to voicemail. Hearing that empty, unanswered ringing made me feel even more alone. I didn't know who else to call. I had been taught not to call my dad at work unless it was an absolute emergency, and in my child's mind, I wasn't sure if this counted. I was scared, yes. But part of me worried I would get in trouble for overreacting. That thought alone still amazes me now, looking back as an adult. So I did nothing. I sat on the bed in my parents' room, my back against the headboard, my knees pulled up to my chest. I was breathing fast, trying not to cry out loud because I didn't want him to hear me. I felt completely trapped, like a small animal hiding and hoping not to be noticed. Downstairs, the noise continued. The doorbell rang again. More pounding, more shouting. He kept saying he knew I was there. Every time he spoke, my body tensed up, expecting the sound of breaking glass or the door splintering open. I imagined him forcing his way inside, running up the stairs, finding me. The fear felt endless, like time had slowed down just to torture me. Minutes felt like hours. At some point, the sound stopped. No more banging, no more shouting. The silence that followed was almost worse. I didn't know if he had left or if he was just waiting quietly, listening for me to move. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, afraid that even the smallest noise would give me away. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I realized I hadn't heard anything in a long time. No footsteps, no voices, no doorbell. Just the normal sounds of the house settling, distant noises from outside, the kind of sounds that had felt comforting earlier in the day. I stayed in that room until my parents came home. When I finally told them what happened, they were horrified. They asked me what the man looked like, but I couldn't give them much detail. I had been too scared to really study his face. All I remembered clearly was the way he stared into the house and the sound of his voice when he shouted at me. My parents called the police, but nothing ever came of it. No one matching the description was found, and there were no reports of similar incidents in the area that we heard about. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. I don't know if he was trying to scare someone, if he thought no one was home, or if something much worse could have happened if I had opened the door. That uncertainty is what makes the memory linger. There's no clear ending, no explanation that makes it easier to process. What I do know is how it felt to be that scared at such a young age. The feeling of being watched, the helplessness of being alone without a way to reach anyone. The way your own house, the place that's supposed to protect you, can suddenly feel like a trap. Even now, years later, I still get uneasy when someone rings the doorbell unexpectedly. I still check windows before opening the door. That moment left a mark on me, not because something terrible happened, but because it so easily could have. Sometimes the scariest experiences are the ones where nothing actually happens in the end, because your imagination fills in all the possibilities you narrowly avoided. I was home alone that morning, which already felt strange because the house was usually loud and busy. My sisters had gone to school and both of my parents were at work. I wasn't supposed to be home either, but I had woken up feeling sick, weak, and drained, so my parents decided it would be better if I stayed back to rest. The house felt unusually quiet once everyone left. No television noise, no arguing over the bathroom, no rushed footsteps. Just silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Even though I wasn't feeling well, hunger eventually got the better of me, so I decided to cook myself some breakfast. I moved slowly, still feeling a bit dizzy, but I wanted to do something normal to distract myself. The cats were shut inside another room, so the kitchen was completely empty except for me. I remember noticing how calm everything felt at that moment. Nothing seemed out of place. The plates were stacked properly, the counters were clean, and there was no breeze or movement in the room at all. I had just finished cooking and was standing near the counter when, without any warning, a plate suddenly fell and shattered on the floor. The sound was loud and sharp, echoing through the quiet house. I froze for a second, confused about what I had just seen. The plate hadn't been near the edge of the counter, and I was at least a meter away from it. I hadn't touched it, bumped the counter, or even moved quickly. There was no reason for it to fall. My first thought was that maybe I had imagined it, or maybe I was more sick than I realized. But the broken pieces scattered across the floor told me it was very real. I stood there for a moment, my heart beating faster than it should have. I looked around the kitchen, half expecting to see something or someone, but there was nothing. Just me, standing alone with shards of ceramic glittering on the floor. I tried to calm myself by thinking logically. Maybe the plate had been unstable. Maybe it had been cracked already. I kept repeating these thoughts in my head as I grabbed a broom and carefully cleaned up the mess. I threw the broken pieces away, wiped the floor, and told myself not to overthink it. After that, I ate my breakfast, though my appetite wasn't the same anymore. The quiet felt heavier now, like the house was watching me. Still, I tried to act normal. Once I was done, I decided to go to my room and log into Minecraft, in thinking that playing a game would help distract me and take my mind off everything that had just happened. I carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it, and walked toward my room. I was just about to step inside when my bedroom door suddenly swung shut, almost slamming directly into my face. I jumped back instinctively, my heart racing. The force was strong enough that if I had taken one more step, I would have been hit. I stood there, staring at the door, completely stunned. There was no wind, no open windows, and no reason for the door to move like that. I slowly reached out and opened it again, my hands shaking slightly. At that point, fear started to sink in. I tried to tell myself that doors can move on their own sometimes, that maybe air pressure caused it, but deep down, I knew it didn't make sense. The house was still, just like before. I went into my room anyway and sat on my bed, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself I was just tired and sick, that my body was playing tricks on me. About 5 minutes later, while I was sitting quietly, I heard something that made my stomach drop. It sounded like a baby crying. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough that I couldn't ignore it. The sound seemed to come from somewhere outside, maybe near the front of the house. I sat there, frozen, listening carefully. The crying continued for a short while, then stopped. My first reaction was confusion. We didn't have a baby in the house, and there were no neighbors with infants close enough that I should be able to hear them so clearly. Still, I felt a strange pull to check. I slowly got up and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened it and stepped outside, looking around to see if someone was there or if a neighbor needed help. There was no one. The street was empty, no stroller, no car, no person standing nearby. Everything was completely silent again. I stood there for a few moments, feeling a chill run through me even though it wasn't cold. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself that maybe I had misheard something. Maybe it was a cat outside or a sound from far away that just happened to resemble a baby crying. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I stayed in my room most of the time, not really playing but just trying to distract myself with the screen in front of me. Every small noise made me tense up. When I finally heard my parents come home later in the evening, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The house felt safer once other people were there, like whatever strange atmosphere had been hanging in the air had faded slightly. That evening, my parents, my older sister and I were all sitting together in the living room. My younger sister was in the other room, busy playing by herself. The house felt more normal again, filled with voices and movement, but the events of the day were still stuck in my mind. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer, so I told them everything. I explained how the plate had fallen on its own, how my door had almost slammed into my face, and how I had heard a baby crying when no one was there. Instead of laughing it off, my family went quiet. My mother exchanged a look with my father before speaking. She told us that there had been a time when she had heard a woman scream inside the house when she was alone. She said she had brushed it off back then, thinking it was her imagination, but she had never completely forgotten it. My older sister then added that she too had once heard a baby crying when no one else was around. Hearing them say this made my chest tighten. It meant I wasn't alone in experiencing these things. The room felt tense after that. No one really knew what to say. We tried to move on and talk about other things, but the mood had shifted. I kept thinking about everything that had happened and how similar our experiences were. That night, when it was time to sleep, I couldn't relax. Every shadow in my room seemed darker than usual. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I lay in bed for hours and staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling. My mind replayed the plate shattering, the door slamming, and the sound of the baby crying over and over again. I kept expecting to hear something else, some new noise that would confirm my fear. Even though nothing else happened, sleep refused to come easily. That night felt longer than any other, and I don't think I truly rested at all. Even now, thinking back on it, the memory of that day still sends a chill down my spine. It was around 9 at night when it happened, that time of evening when the house is quiet, lights are dim, and everything feels settled for the night. My wife and our newborn were both asleep. The baby had finally gone down after a long day, and the house had that fragile silence you don't want to disturb because you know how hard it can be to get it back once it's gone. I was awake, doing nothing important, just enjoying the calm and thinking about turning in myself. When there was a knock on the door, I wasn't alarmed at first. I remember feeling mildly annoyed more than anything. In our area, people selling things door to door wasn't unusual, even at odd hours. Solar panels, home services, internet upgrades, warranties. It felt like someone was always trying to sell something. My first thought was that it was probably another solar salesperson who didn't care what time it was. I didn't stop to think enough. That's the part that still bothers me. I didn't check through a window. I didn't ask who it was through the door. I just assumed it was harmless and opened it. Standing there was a man I didn't recognize. He was holding a clipboard, but something about it immediately felt off. The clipboard looked empty. No papers clipped to it, no logo, no branding. He wasn't wearing a name tag, uniform, or anything that clearly identified who he was or where he worked. At the time, I noticed all of this, but my brain was still trying to be polite, still trying to fit him into a normal explanation. He said he was with a home warranty company and that he needed access to my breaker box. That statement alone should have set off every alarm in my head. It was late. I hadn't called any company. There was no reason anyone would need to check my breaker box at 9 at night, especially without notice. The more I think about it now, the more obvious it seems. But in the moment, things don't always line up so clearly. I told him it was late and that he needed to leave. I didn't raise my voice. I wasn't aggressive. I was firm, but calm. I expected him to argue, maybe try to convince me, then leave like most salespeople do. Instead, he stepped forward. Before I fully understood what was happening, he forced himself past me and into my entryway. It all happened fast, but it also felt slow, like my mind was lagging behind my body. 1 second I was standing in my doorway, the next he was inside my house. At that moment changed everything. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. A wave of fear and anger hit me at the same time. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't a pushy salesperson. This was someone who had just crossed a line in the most literal way possible. He stood there in my entryway and looked around, just for a few seconds, but those seconds felt endless. His eyes moved, taking in the space, like he was assessing something. I remember thinking about my wife asleep down the hall, about my newborn, about how vulnerable they were, about how I had just let a stranger into our home. My body reacted before my mind had time to fully catch up. I grabbed him and put him in a headlock. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about consequences or legality or anything else. All I knew was that he needed to be out of my house immediately. I walked him back toward the door, holding him tight, controlling his movement. I don't remember him fighting much. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten me, he didn't even really protest. That silence somehow made it scarier. It was like he wasn't surprised by what was happening, like this wasn't the first time something like this had gone wrong for him. I pushed him outside and let him go. The moment he was free, he didn't turn around. He didn't say a word. He didn't look back. He just walked away down the street, calm and steady, disappearing into the darkness like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment after closing the door, my hands shaking. The house was still quiet. My wife and baby were still asleep, completely unaware of what had just happened. The silence felt heavy, almost unreal. That's when the fear really set in. Not the adrenaline-fueled fear from the confrontation, but the deep, sick fear that comes afterward. The kind where your mind starts replaying everything over and over again. What if I hadn't been strong enough? What if he had a weapon? What if he had pushed past me further? What if my wife had woken up and come into the hallway? What if the baby had started crying? I realized how easily everything could have gone wrong. How one bad decision, one moment of complacency, had opened the door to something potentially horrible. I kept thinking the same thought again and again. I answered the door, and he got inside my house. That thought haunted me. I checked every lock. I walked through every room. I made sure the doors were secure, the windows closed. I stood there in the dark, listening for any sound, any movement outside. Every noise made my heart jump. I barely slept that night, and when I did, it was shallow and restless. In the days that followed, the fear didn't fade the way I expected it to. It stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd replay the moment he stepped inside, the look on his face, the way he scanned the room. I'd think about how calm he was when he left. That calmness bothered me more than anything else. I didn't tell my wife right away. Part of me didn't want to scare her. She had enough on her plate with a newborn. Another part of me felt ashamed. Ashamed that I had answered the door so casually. Ashamed that I had let someone get inside at all. I kept telling myself I could handle it, that I could just move on and forget it. But I couldn't bottle it up. The anxiety started bleeding into everything. I was jumpy. I was tense. I found myself checking the door multiple times a night. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep properly. I kept imagining different versions of how that night could have ended. Eventually, I told her the next morning. I sat her down and explained what happened, carefully, trying not to make it sound worse than it already was, but also not minimizing it. Watching her reaction was hard. The fear in her eyes mirrored what I had been carrying alone, but there was also relief in finally sharing it, relief in not being alone with it anymore. We talked about what to do next. We both agreed that what mattered most was that no one was hurt. Not us, not the baby, not even the guy who forced his way in. But that didn't mean we could just ignore it and hope it never happened again. Within a few days, we installed security cameras. We added an alarm system. We changed how we handled unexpected knocks at the door. No more answering without checking. No more assumptions. No more politeness overriding common sense. Even with those changes, the emotional impact lingered for a long time. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the idea that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it comes holding an empty clipboard, speaking calmly, counting on your instinct to be polite. Looking back now, I'm grateful the situation ended the way it did. I'm grateful my instincts kicked in when they did. I'm grateful my family slept through it and was spared the trauma of witnessing it. But I'm also changed by it. That night taught me how quickly safety can be breached, how thin the barrier is between normal life and chaos, how important it is to trust your instincts, especially when something feels even slightly off. It wasn't a dramatic crime story. There were no sirens, no police reports, no headlines. But it left a deep mark on me all the same. Some fears don't come from what happened, but from realizing how close you came to something far worse. And that realization stays with you for a long time. A few weeks ago, something happened that still doesn't feel completely real when I think back on it. It started like any other ordinary day, quiet and uneventful. The kind of day where nothing feels out of place. I was home alone, which wasn't unusual for me. And because the air conditioning had broken down, I had all the windows and doors open to let in whatever breeze I could find. The house felt exposed, but at the time it didn't bother me. It was warm, still, and peaceful enough that my guard was completely down. I remember moving around the house doing small, meaningless things, half focused on my thoughts, half listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood. Cars passing occasionally, birds, maybe someone mowing a lawn somewhere far off. Nothing that suggested danger. Nothing that would have made me think that within minutes, or my entire sense of safety would be completely ripped away. At some point, I noticed movement outside that didn't feel normal. It started with the sound of car doors slamming and engines cutting off abruptly. When I looked through the window, I saw police vehicles pulling into the area, one after another, faster than I could process. It wasn't just one or two cars, it was many. They filled the street, then spilled into nearby streets, blocking off exits. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, moving quickly but carefully, like they were following a plan they had practiced many times before. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I stood frozen, watching as police spread out, walking between houses, moving through yards, ducking behind fences and hedges. Some of them passed so close to my windows that I could see the tension in their faces. Their focus was intense, sharp and serious, in a way that made it clear this was not a drill or some minor incident. These were armed officers searching for someone dangerous. Only then did I realize how vulnerable I was. I was alone. My doors were open. My windows were open. I had no idea what was happening or who they were looking for, but the presence of so many armed officers made one thing painfully obvious. Whoever they were after was close. Very close. Later, I would find out that armed gunmen had ditched their car not far from my house and fled on foot. At the time, All I knew was that something was very wrong, and I was standing in the middle of it without any warning. I didn't know whether to lock the doors, close the windows, hide, or stay where I was. Every option felt wrong. Moving around might draw attention, and staying still felt like waiting to be found. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and every small sound suddenly felt amplified. The creak of the floor, the rustle of leaves outside, even my own breathing felt too loud. The police search continued, stretching on longer than I expected. Officers moved with purpose, communicating quietly, scanning every corner. They were weaving between houses, checking behind sheds, peering into backyards, moving through spaces people normally consider private and safe. Watching that made it sink in just how serious the situation was. If they were searching this thoroughly, the gunman could be hiding anywhere. Then suddenly, the calm, tense silence shattered. I heard my neighbor scream, not shout, not call out casually. Scream. The sound was sharp, panicked, and desperate, cutting straight through the air and straight through me. My entire body went rigid as I heard her yelling at the police, her voice cracking with fear and urgency. She was screaming that the gunman was right there, right here. Before I could even fully understand what she meant, everything happened at once. Officers rushed toward my house, shouting commands, their movements fast and aggressive. I could hear boots pounding the ground, radios crackling, voices overlapping. I barely had time to react before I realized what she meant by right here. They pulled a man out of my front bushes. My bushes. The ones just a few feet from where I had been standing not long before, completely unaware that someone dangerous might be hiding there. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just nearby. This wasn't down the street or around the corner. One of the armed gunmen had been hiding directly outside my home. As police dragged him out, yelling commands, forcing him to the ground, the reality of how close I had come to something truly terrifying settled over me. If he had decided to move, if he had tried to get inside, if I had stepped outside at the wrong moment, any one of those small, ordinary actions could have ended very differently. I watched from inside, barely breathing, as officers secured him, handcuffed him, and moved him away. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any second. Even though he was no longer a threat, the fear didn't disappear. If anything, it intensified, because if one gunman had been that close, where were the others? That question hung heavy in the air. As the search continued, information slowly spread through neighbors and police activity. One of the other gunmen had broken into a nearby house down the street to hide. The thought of someone so desperate and dangerous forcing their way into another person's home sent another wave of fear through me. I imagined being in that position, hearing someone enter, not knowing who it was or what they would do next. The police presence remained heavy for a long time. Streets stayed blocked. Officers continued moving through yards, checking houses, making sure no one else was hiding. The neighborhood that usually felt familiar and safe now felt foreign and threatening. Every shadow seemed darker. Every movement felt suspicious. Eventually, things began to calm down. The immediate danger passed, and police started to leave one by one. But even as normal sounds returned and the streets reopened, I didn't feel normal again. The sense of safety I had before that day was gone. After everything settled, I closed and locked every door and window, even though the heat was uncomfortable. I couldn't bring myself to leave anything open anymore. The open air that had felt harmless earlier now felt like an invitation to danger. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside made my heart race. A car passing, someone walking by, wind moving the bushes. I kept replaying the moment in my head, imagining how easily things could have gone wrong. how close I'd been to being in real danger without even knowing it. What scared me the most wasn't just the presence of armed gunmen. It was how normal everything had felt right before. Yeah, how quickly ordinary life had turned into something out of a nightmare. One moment I was home alone, thinking about nothing important. The next, my house was part of an active police search for armed suspects. Even now, weeks later, the memory still lingers. Every time I hear sirens nearby, my chest tightens. Every time I walk past the front bushes, I think about the man who was hiding there, watching, waiting, while I had no idea. It's unsettling to realize how thin the line is between safety and danger, and how easily it can be crossed without warning. That day taught me something I'll never forget. Safety can feel permanent, but it isn't. Sometimes it only exists because nothing bad has happened yet. And sometimes, without any sign or reason, that illusion can shatter in seconds. I lived in a pretty rural part of Tennessee at the time, the kind of place where houses were spaced far apart and neighbors weren't always within shouting distance. It was quiet, peaceful most days, and I usually felt safe there. That afternoon, I was home alone, which wasn't unusual. I had 2 Weimaraner with me, my constant companions. They were large, sleek, grey dogs with gentle personalities, the kind people often describe as Velcro dogs, because they always want to be close. To me, they weren't guard dogs. They were family, sweet, affectionate, and usually more interested in curling up next to me than anything else. The day felt normal at first, calm, nothing out of place. I don't remember feeling anxious or alert in any special way. If anything, I was relaxed. The dogs were nearby, lounging as they often did, or one stretched out on the floor and the other hovering close to me. It was just another quiet afternoon. Then there was a knock at the door. That alone made me pause. In a rural area, you don't get many unexpected visitors. I wasn't expecting anyone, and instinctively, something about it made me cautious. I approached the door carefully and cracked it open, keeping the chain on. Outside stood a man I didn't recognize. He claimed he was selling magazines. He spoke casually, confidently, like this was a normal interaction and like he expected me to listen. I didn't. I politely but firmly told him no, thank you. I didn't explain myself or make excuses. I just said no and began to close the door. That should have been the end of it. That's how these interactions are supposed to go, but it wasn't. As I started closing the door, he suddenly shoved his foot between the door and the jamb. The movement was fast and aggressive. The door stopped short, jolting in my hands. Before I could fully process what was happening, he began pushing the door back toward me, using his weight. In that moment, everything inside me dropped. Fear flooded my body so quickly it was overwhelming. My heart started pounding violently, and my mind went completely blank except for one thought. This is really happening. This man was not leaving. He wasn't taking no for an answer. He was trying to force his way into my home. I pushed back with everything I had. I leaned my body into the door, my hands shaking, my feet sliding slightly against the floor. He was stronger than me. I could feel it. The door moved inch by inch despite my effort. Panic set in, hard and fast. I was certain I was about to become a victim. I remember thinking in a strange, detached way that this was how stories you hear on the news begin. And then everything changed. One of my Weimaraners, the male, was intact and usually the gentlest soul you could imagine. He was a lapdog at heart, affectionate, goofy, always wanting attention. But something in him snapped the instant that man crossed the line. It was like watching a switch flip. In less than a second, he went from calm and loving to pure, focused fury. He launched himself at the man without hesitation. He clamped onto the man's calf with a grip so strong it looked unreal, like a bear trap snapping shut. There was no warning growl, no hesitation, just total commitment. He did not let go. The man screamed, a raw, panicked sound, and immediately began trying to shake him off. But my dog held on, teeth locked, body rigid, absolutely determined. At the same time, my female Weimaraner reacted in her own way. She didn't bite, but she exploded into motion. She ran circles around the man, barking non-stop, jumping, lunging forward and back, creating chaos. Her movement made it impossible for him to focus or regain control. She was everywhere at once, loud, fast, relentless. The man was completely overwhelmed. He let go of the door and stumbled backward, trying desperately to pry my male dog off his leg, while also dodging the female's movements. Blood was already visible, and his panic escalated as he realized he was losing control of the situation. He finally managed to break free enough to stagger toward his car, my dog releasing only when the man was far enough away to no longer be a threat. The entire thing happened so fast, yet it felt like time had stretched and twisted. My body was shaking uncontrollably. Once the man fled, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands barely working. My legs felt weak, like they might give out beneath me. I called the sheriff immediately. When the deputies arrived, there was no man to be found. All that remained were pieces of fabric from his pants, a trail of blood leading down the driveway, and bits of flesh scattered where the struggle had taken place. The scene spoke for itself. The deputies took statements, examined the area, and acknowledged just how close the situation had been to something far worse. Everyone told me how lucky I was. They told me how incredible my dogs were, how well they protected me, how things could have ended very differently without them. And they were right. I knew they were right. I was endlessly grateful to my 2 gray babies, my protectors, my heroes. But even with all that, the fear didn't disappear. After the adrenaline faded, what was left was terror. Pure, shaking terror at the realization of how vulnerable I had been. How easily that man could have gotten inside, how close I came to something unspeakable happening. I kept replaying the moment in my head, imagining what might have happened if the dogs hadn't been there, or if they had reacted differently, or if I had opened the door just a little wider. That what if haunted me. Even knowing I was safe in the end, even knowing my dogs did an incredible job, I couldn't shake the feeling of how quickly safety can vanish. One moment I was standing in my home, politely declining a sales pitch. The next, I was fighting to keep a stranger out while my life hung in the balance. I never forgot that day. It changed how I answered doors. It changed how I viewed my surroundings. It changed how I understood danger, and it deepened my bond with my dogs in a way that words don't fully capture. They weren't just pets anymore. They were the reason I walked away unharmed. To this day, I can still feel that surge of fear, that moment when instinct took over and survival became the only thing that mattered. It's burned into my memory as a reminder of how fast things can go wrong, and how sometimes the ones who save us are the ones quietly lying at our feet, waiting for the moment we need them most. One summer, I took a job on Long Island as a handyman. It was temporary, just a way to make money for a few months, but the place itself was unusual enough that it stuck with me. The property was large and old, the kind of estate that felt separate from the rest of the world. I wasn't alone there either. The chef lived on the property, along with a few housekeepers, and we all stayed in different parts of the house or nearby buildings. What made the job especially strange was the location. We weren't far from the original Amityville house, close enough that people constantly brought it up. Locals pointed it out casually, like it was just another landmark, but you could always tell they enjoyed the reaction it got. Visitors would slow down when driving past, staring a little too long. Even people who didn't believe in anything paranormal still talked about it with a certain tone, like the house carried weight just by existing. I heard about it almost every day. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I had the house to myself. Everyone else was out, and the property was completely quiet. It felt like the perfect time to finally watch the Amityville Horror, the original one from the 1970s. I figured if I was going to watch it, I might as well do it properly, alone at night in the same area where the real house stood. I told myself it was just a movie. I settled in, turned off most of the lights, and pressed play. The house felt unusually still, even for a quiet evening. Outside, the sky was darkening faster than usual. I didn't think much of it at first. Summer storms were common, and the air had that heavy, charged feeling that often came before rain. As the movie went on, the storm rolled in. Rain started tapping against the windows, soft at first, then harder. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and slow. It added to the mood in a way that felt almost too perfect, like the universe was leaning into the moment. I remember thinking how cliché it all felt, watching a haunted house movie near the actual house during a storm. Still, I kept watching. Then the movie reached one of its most unsettling scenes. The mother walks over to the window, sensing that something is wrong. She pulls back the curtain and sees a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at her from the darkness outside. Right at that exact moment, the sky exploded. A blinding flash of lightning lit up the room, followed immediately by a thunderclap so loud it made me flinch. And then everything went black. The TV shut off, the lights went out. The house fell into sudden, complete darkness. The power was gone. For a few seconds I just sat there, frozen, heart pounding, listening to the rain hammering against the roof. The silence inside the house felt thick, almost oppressive. Without the movie noise, every creak and distant rumble felt amplified. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to break the tension. Power outages happen. Storms knock out electricity. There was nothing supernatural about that. Still, my hands were shaking a little as I stood up and went to find candles. I lit a few and placed them around the room. The soft, flickering light barely pushed back the darkness, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. The house felt older somehow in candlelight, like it had slipped back in time. Every corner looked deeper, every hallway longer. Out of habit, I walked over to the window. I don't know what I expected to see. Probably just rain, trees swaying, darkness. Maybe a little comfort in seeing something normal. I pulled back the curtain and looked out, and there it was. The only thing clearly visible through the rain and darkness was the Amityville house. It sat there down the street, unmistakable, its shape and windows instantly recognizable. The storm lit it up in brief flashes of lightning, revealing it in stark detail before plunging it back into shadow. Each flash felt like a snapshot, burned into my vision. I just stood there staring. Rationally, I knew nothing had changed. The house had been there all along. I had seen it countless times in daylight, but seeing it then, framed by darkness, rain, and candlelight, right after that scene in the movie, made my skin crawl. The timing was too perfect, too cruel. I felt a deep, creeping unease settle in my chest. Not panic exactly, but a heavy awareness, like I was suddenly very aware of how alone I was. The storm continued raging outside, thunder cracking overhead, lightning flashing just enough to keep my nerves on edge. I stepped away from the window and sat back down, but I couldn't relax. Every sound made me tense. The rain hitting the roof, the house settling, the faint whistle of wind pushing against old windows. my imagination filled in the gaps, replaying scenes from the movie, mixing them with the real house sitting silently nearby. I didn't turn the movie back on when the power eventually returned. I didn't need to. That image, the glowing eyes from the film, and the real house outside my window had already burned itself into my mind. Even after the lights came back and the storm passed, the feeling lingered. I slept lightly that night, waking at every sound, half expecting to look out the window again and see something staring back at me. Nothing ever happened after that. No strange noises, no unexplained events. Just one perfectly timed moment that blurred the line between fiction and reality in the most unsettling way possible. But even now, years later, I still remember how it felt, standing there in the candlelight, rain pouring down, staring at that house in the dark. It was a reminder that sometimes the scariest experiences aren't about what actually happens, but about timing, atmosphere, and how easily your mind can turn an ordinary moment into something unforgettable. And no matter how much time passes, that image never really leaves you. I remember that night very clearly, even though at the time it didn't feel like anything important was about to happen. I was just in my bedroom, doing absolutely nothing special. It was one of those quiet evenings where time moves slowly. I was lying back, maybe scrolling on my phone or half paying attention to something on a screen, just enjoying the feeling of being home and relaxed. The house was calm. Everyone else was settled in for the night, and there was nothing that suggested trouble was anywhere nearby. At some point, I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud enough to be immediately alarming, but it was out of place. The kind of sound that makes you pause and listen again, just to be sure you actually heard something. It came from the backyard. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe something fell over. Maybe the wind caught something just right. Our minds are very good at normalizing strange sounds when we don't want to believe something is wrong. But the sound came again, and this time it was more deliberate. Footsteps, not heavy, but clear enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. My body went still. I sat up and listened, holding my breath without even realizing it. The house itself was silent, which somehow made the noise outside stand out even more. Slowly, carefully, I moved toward the window and looked out into the backyard. That's when I saw him. There was a man walking through my backyard like he belonged there. Not sneaking exactly, but not casual either. He was moving with purpose, looking around, scanning the area. The sight of a complete stranger in a space that was supposed to be private sent a shock through my entire body. My heart started pounding instantly, and I felt a rush of adrenaline that made my hands shake. This wasn't someone who had accidentally wandered onto the property. This wasn't a neighbor cutting through or someone looking for a lost pet. Something about his body language made it clear that he wasn't supposed to be there, and he knew it. My first instinct wasn't to yell or run outside. It was to prepare. I backed away from the window quietly, my mind racing through possibilities. Was he alone? Was he armed? Was he trying to break into houses? Had he already been inside someone else's home? I grabbed the only thing nearby that made me feel like I had any chance of defending myself if it came to that. I owned a sword, something that up until that moment had been more of a hobby item than anything practical. Suddenly, it felt very real, very necessary. Holding it didn't make me feel brave, but it did make me feel less helpless. I positioned myself where I could see the windows and doors that faced the backyard. I stood there, tense and silent, waiting. Every sound felt amplified. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. My muscles were tight, ready to react at the slightest movement. I kept watching the backyard through gaps in the curtains, expecting him to test a window or come closer to the house. Every second stretched out longer than it should have. I was fully aware of how ridiculous and terrifying the situation was at the same time. Here I was, standing in my bedroom, holding a sword, waiting to see if a stranger would try to break into my home. After what felt like forever, he moved on. I watched as he passed my house completely and crossed the street toward the neighbor's place. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a different kind of fear. Just because he wasn't targeting my house didn't mean the danger was gone. It meant it was moving somewhere else. Someone else was about to be in the position I had just been in. That's when I picked up my phone and called 911. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be, but my hands were still shaking. I explained that there was a man walking through backyards in the neighborhood and that I had just watched him enter my neighbor's property. The dispatcher took it seriously right away. Hearing that calm, professional voice on the other end of the line helped ground me a little. I stayed by the window while I was on the phone, watching the neighbor's house, trying to describe what I could see. I felt strange, like I was watching something unfold that I wasn't really part of, but that I was deeply invested in. I kept thinking about the people who lived there, about how vulnerable everyone is inside their own homes, especially when they have no idea someone dangerous might be right outside. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. Within minutes, I saw flashing lights approaching. 4 police cars pulled up almost at the same time, surrounding the neighbor's house from different angles. The sudden presence of law enforcement transformed the quiet street into something tense and serious. Red and blue lights reflected off houses and cars, cutting through the darkness. I stayed inside, watching from a distance. I didn't want to get in the way or draw attention to myself. My heart was still racing, but now it was mixed with a sense of cautious relief. I had done the right thing by calling. Help was there. The police moved quickly and methodically. Officers got out of their cars, weapons drawn, communicating with each other in low, controlled voices. They positioned themselves around the house, clearly prepared for resistance. Seeing that level of response made it very clear that this wasn't a harmless situation. This wasn't someone confused or lost. This was a real crime in progress. A few minutes later, it happened. They pulled the man out of the neighbor's house. Even from where I was, it was obvious what was going on. He was caught in the act of burglary. He didn't look like a random passerby anymore. He looked exactly like what he was, someone who had chosen to violate other people's safety and privacy. Watching him being taken into custody was surreal. The same person who had been quietly walking through my backyard moments earlier was now surrounded by police, his freedom gone. I stood there for a long time after everything settled down. The police eventually left, and the street returned to its usual quiet state. But nothing felt the same. The calm that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with everything that could have gone wrong but didn't. Later, we talked to the neighbors. They were shaken, grateful, and more aware than ever of how close the danger had been. They thanked us, and that shared experience created a bond that hadn't existed before. From that point on, our families were on very good terms. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a sense of looking out for one another. What stayed with me the most, though, was how ordinary the night had started. There was no warning, no build-up, just a random sound in the backyard that could have easily been ignored. If I hadn't looked, if I had brushed it off, if I had assumed everything was fine, things could have ended very differently. That experience changed how I think about safety and awareness. It taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, walking through your backyard while you're just trying to relax in your bedroom. It reminded me how quickly normal life can shift into something threatening, and how important it is to trust that feeling when something doesn't seem right. I also learned something about fear. In the moment, it wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, focused, and heavy. It was standing still, listening, preparing, and hoping you wouldn't need to act. Fear doesn't always make you panic. Sometimes it makes you alert and calculating, aware of every detail. Even now, I still think about that night when I hear unexpected noises outside. I still look twice at shadows in the yard. I still remember the weight of that sword in my hands and the way my heart pounded as I waited. It wasn't about wanting to fight anyone. It was about wanting to protect my home and the people inside it. In the end, no one in my house was hurt. The neighbors were okay. The man was caught. Everything ended as well as it possibly could have, but the memory remains sharp. A reminder that safety is fragile, and that sometimes the smallest actions, like paying attention and making a phone call, can make a huge difference. That night could have been just another quiet evening. Instead, it became one of those moments that stays with you, not because of what happened, but because of how close everything came to going very wrong. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. He actually belonged to my stepdad, but since I had never had a cat before, I immediately claimed him as my own. Buster, however, did not share my enthusiasm. He was never fond of being hugged or coddled, especially by a little kid who didn't understand a cat's need for space. He avoided me whenever he could, slipping away when I tried to pet him or pick him up. On top of that, he was an outdoor cat, so most of his days were spent roaming around the neighborhood, only returning at night to sleep or eat. One night, Buster didn't come home. Normally, he would be back by dinner time, and my parents always made sure he had his food before bed. I started to feel worried. Our neighborhood was known for having lots of coyotes, and I had a growing fear that something bad had happened to him. My parents were unusually quiet about the whole situation, but at 6, I didn't pick up on the subtle hints. I just assumed he would show up eventually. That night, as I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I felt a weight beside my head. Startled, I opened my eyes and saw Buster there. He had jumped onto my bed and was lying quietly next to me. For the first time ever, he let me pet him. His fur was soft, and I could feel him purring gently. I was amazed. My little heart swelled with happiness. I finally thought Buster had grown to love me. I petted him until my eyes grew heavy, and soon I fell asleep with him lying there beside me. The next morning, I rushed downstairs, full of excitement. I proudly told my parents that Buster now loved me because he had slept in my bed all night. They exchanged a look that I didn't understand at the time, then gently sat me down at the breakfast table. My parents explained something that completely shattered my little world. While they had been outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. It seemed he had been attacked, probably by a coyote. He was gone. He hadn't slept in my bed at all that night. He had been dead. I remember feeling a mix of confusion, sadness, and awe all at once. I couldn't understand how something that felt so real could have happened when he wasn't alive. Over the years, I have tried to make sense of it in my own way. I like to believe that Buster had returned in some mysterious way to say goodbye. Maybe he wanted to let me know that he recognized my love, even if it had been clumsy and persistent. Even though he had hated my constant attention and avoided me for most of his life, that night I felt like we shared a quiet connection that went beyond the physical world. Buster's brief visit left an impression that has stayed with me all these years. I have never forgotten him, and I often think about that night, the night when he seemed to say, in the only way he could, "Thank you for trying to love me." It's a memory that is both haunting and comforting. Haunting because it reminds me of how fragile life can be, even for a cat that seemed so untouchable. Comforting because in that brief moment we connected in a way that no one could ever take away. for a little child, that was more than enough. It was a goodbye, wrapped in the soft warmth of fur and the gentle vibration of a purr, or a silent acknowledgement that the love I had tried to give him mattered, even if he never showed it while he was alive. Even now, decades later, I sometimes feel a presence when I think about that night. I like to imagine Buster's spirit watching over me, still mischievous and stubborn, yet grateful in his own quiet way. It's strange to say, but the memory has shaped the way I see love and loss. It taught me that sometimes affection doesn't need to be returned in obvious ways to matter. Sometimes the love we give touches someone, or something, long after they are gone. That night with Buster remains one of the most powerful moments of my childhood. It was a night that blurred the line between life and death, reality and mystery. And though I will never fully understand it, I carry it with me, a small but profound lesson in love, our connection, and the way beings can communicate in ways that go beyond the physical. Even today, whenever I see a cat or hear a soft purr, I can't help but think of Buster, that stubborn little cat who avoided me, yet found a way to tell me goodbye. That night, he became more than just a pet. He became a story of love, loss, and a quiet, miraculous connection that I will carry with me forever. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. It had been about a year since my divorce, and by then I had settled into a quiet routine. Life felt calmer than it had in a long time. I lived alone, worked during the day, went to the gym in the evenings, and mostly kept to myself. The neighborhood wasn't the best, but it also wasn't shocking to see police cars from time to time. That area always seemed to have something going on, so flashing lights or cruisers parked nearby didn't immediately raise alarms for me. That evening, I came home from work like usual. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a few police cruisers parked across the road. They were lined up neatly, lights off, officers standing around casually. I remember thinking it was just another incident, probably a traffic stop or something small happening a few houses down. I didn't feel worried. I parked my car and grabbed my bag and went inside like everything was normal. Inside, the house felt quiet and familiar. I locked the door behind me and went straight to the bedroom to change clothes so I could head to the gym. As I was getting ready, I heard a sound that made me pause for a moment. It was a helicopter. At first, I barely noticed it, because helicopters weren't unheard of either. But this one sounded different. It was loud, deep, and persistent. It wasn't passing by. It was circling. I went into the bathroom, and the sound grew louder. The walls seemed to vibrate slightly. It felt like the helicopter was hovering directly over the house. The noise filled every room, and suddenly it didn't feel normal anymore. I stood still, listening, trying to understand what was happening. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe there was an accident nearby. Maybe someone needed medical transport. Still, something about the sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Time passed, and the sun began to set. The house grew darker as the evening settled in. I finished getting dressed, put on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and headed toward the front door. I was still planning to go to the gym. I hadn't seen or heard anything that told me I shouldn't. The moment I opened the front door, everything changed. A blinding white light hit me straight in the eyes. It was so bright that I couldn't see anything else for a split second. Before I could even process what was happening, a loud, commanding voice shouted from across the street, "Get back in the house now!" There was no hesitation in that voice, no room for confusion. It was pure authority, loud and sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "Yes, sir," I said automatically, my body reacting before my mind caught up. I slammed the door shut as fast as I could, my heart suddenly racing. The normal, quiet evening I thought I was having disappeared in an instant. My hands were shaking as I locked the door and stepped back from it. The realization hit me all at once. Whatever was happening outside was serious. I stayed away from the windows. I didn't want to look out, and I definitely didn't want to be seen. The fear wasn't loud panic yet, but a deep, tight feeling in my chest. The kind of fear that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. I didn't actually see much of what happened next, but I heard it. The helicopter continued circling overhead, the steady thumping of the blades never stopping. Occasionally, I could hear voices outside, or radios crackling, footsteps on pavement. The entire street had been locked down. No one was allowed to leave their homes. As I stood there, trying to understand the situation, there was a knock at the door. Not a casual knock, a firm, controlled knock. My stomach dropped. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the door. I asked who it was, my voice quieter than I expected it to be. "Police," came the response. I opened the door just enough to see an officer standing there in full black body armor. He looked nothing like the patrol officers I was used to seeing. This was SWAT gear. Heavy vest, helmet, weapon held professionally, but ready. On his chest was a single white patch with the name Gonzalez written on it. Officer Gonzalez stepped inside carefully, his eyes scanning the room immediately. His gaze was intense, distant, focused in a way that made my skin crawl. He swept my living room slowly, methodically, as if he expected someone to jump out from behind the couch at any moment. His presence alone was enough to make me feel like there was danger behind me, even though I knew I was alone. For a split second, I actually turned my head to check behind me. That's how convincing his focus was. He asked me calmly if anyone else was inside the house. I told him no. He asked if I had any dogs in the backyard. I told him I didn't. He nodded, thanked me, and moved on just as quickly as he had arrived. The door closed behind him, and I was alone again. But nothing felt normal anymore. I stood there in silence, listening. The helicopter never left. I could hear officers moving through neighboring yards, the clink of gear, muffled commands. Somewhere nearby, a megaphone crackled to life. "Give yourself up. We have you surrounded." The voice echoed through the neighborhood, loud and unavoidable. Hearing those words made everything suddenly feel very real. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a misunderstanding. There was a dangerous armed person hiding somewhere close to me, maybe behind a fence, maybe in a backyard, maybe only a few houses away. I imagined every possible scenario. I wondered how close he was to my house. I wondered if he had been nearby while I was changing clothes, completely unaware. I wondered what would have happened if I had stepped outside a few minutes earlier, before the lockdown was fully in place. Time moved strangely after that. The situation lasted around 45 minutes, but it felt much longer. I stayed in the center of the house, away from windows, sitting down because my legs felt weak. Every loud sound made my heart jump. Every shout or command made me tense. Eventually, the megaphone spoke again. This time, there was more shouting, more voices, urgent commands being yelled back and forth. Then came the sound of movement, bodies rushing, people being forced to the ground. I didn't see it, but I knew they had found him. There was a lot of noise for a few moments, officers yelling, someone resisting. Then the unmistakable sound of control being regained. The fugitive was taken down, forced to the ground, and cuffed under a pile of cops. After that, slowly, The sounds began to fade. The helicopter moved off. The shouting stopped. Police radios quieted. The street, which had felt like a war zone moments earlier, began to return to normal. Later, I learned more details. That the man they were looking for was dangerous and armed. He had been hiding in the neighborhood, moving through backyards, trying not to be seen. The SWAT team had been called in because he was considered a serious threat. That night, after everything was over, I sat alone in my house and thought about how close everything had come. How easily I could have walked into something terrible without knowing it. How thin the line is between an ordinary evening and something life-changing. I didn't go to the gym that night. I double-checked every lock before going to bed. I slept lightly, waking at every sound. Even now, years later, I still remember the brightness of that spotlight, the authority in that officer's voice, and the feeling of realizing that danger had been right outside my door while I was just trying to live a normal life. Sometimes the scariest moments aren't loud or dramatic at first. Sometimes they start quietly, like an ordinary day, and turn serious in the blink of an eye. I was very young when this happened, somewhere around 4th grade. I was still at that age where the world felt mostly safe, where adults handled the scary stuff and kids were supposed to worry about homework, cartoons, and what snacks were waiting at home. My younger brother was with me that day, and like many afternoons, we took the school bus back to our apartment complex. Nothing about the day felt unusual at first. It was just another school day ending, another routine walk home we had done countless times before. We got off the bus at our usual stop. It was only a short walk through the apartment complex to our building, a path we knew well. We talked casually as we walked, not really paying attention to anything around us. That changed when I started to get a strange feeling that we weren't alone. At first, it was just a sense of being watched. You know that feeling you get when something doesn't quite feel right, even if you can't immediately explain why. I glanced back over my shoulder and saw a man walking behind us. He wasn't someone I recognized from the complex. That alone wasn't necessarily alarming, but something about the way he was moving made my stomach tighten. He wasn't passing by us or heading in a different direction. He was matching our pace. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Lots of people lived in the complex. Lots of people walked around after school hours. But every time I looked back, he was still there, the same distance behind us, close enough that I could clearly see him, but far enough that he didn't look like he was just casually walking with us. I slowed down slightly, pretending to adjust my backpack. My brother slowed down too. The man slowed down as well. My heart started pounding. I sped up, my brother struggling to keep up with me. The man sped up. That's when fear really hit me. I grabbed my brother's hand and told him to walk faster, my voice low and tense. I didn't want to scare him too much, but I needed him to understand that something was wrong. The walk that normally took just a few minutes felt endless. Every step felt heavier than the last. I could hear our footsteps and behind them, his. We didn't run. We were scared to run, scared that running might make things worse. Instead, we walked as fast as we could without breaking into a sprint, heading straight for our building. I kept glancing back, my chest tight, my thoughts racing. I remember thinking that if he grabbed us, I wouldn't know what to do. I was just a kid. All I could think about was keeping my brother close and getting inside. When we finally reached our apartment building, I felt a small wave of relief. We rushed inside, went straight to our apartment, and slammed the door shut behind us. I locked it immediately, my hands shaking so badly it took me a second to get the lock to turn. We stood there in silence, listening. There were footsteps outside, but after a moment they faded. We didn't hear anything else. No knock, no voice, nothing. It was quiet again. That quiet felt strange, like the calm after something terrible almost happens. We called our mom right away. She was at work, and I tried to explain what happened as clearly as I could. I told her a man had followed us home from the bus stop. She took it seriously, told us we did the right thing by locking the door, and said she would come home as soon as she could. She also told us not to open the door for anyone, no matter what. After that call, we waited. At first, I thought the worst was over. I thought maybe the man had just been walking in the same direction and that I had overreacted. I wanted to believe that, because believing it made the fear easier to handle. We sat inside, trying to distract ourselves, staying close together. Time passed slowly, but nothing happened. Then, about an hour later, everything changed again. Without any warning, there was a loud bang on the front door. Not a knock, a bang. Then another, and another. The sound was violent, aggressive, and terrifying. It echoed through the apartment, making the walls feel like they were shaking. Whoever was on the other side wasn't tapping or asking politely. They were pounding on the door as hard as they could. My heart felt like it stopped. I looked at my brother and saw pure fear on his face. He knew it too. Somehow, without saying it out loud, we both knew it was the same man. The pounding didn't stop. It just kept going, over and over again, loud and relentless. Each hit sounded like it might break the door open. I remember thinking that if the door gave in, there would be nothing between us and him. He never said a word. That was one of the scariest parts. No yelling, no demands, no explanation. Just the sound of fists slamming into the door again and again. The silence between the bangs made it even worse, because my mind filled in the gaps with every horrible possibility. I told my brother to go into his room and stay there. I tried to sound brave, but my voice was shaking. He didn't want to leave me, but I insisted. I didn't want him standing there if the door broke. Once he was in his room, I went to the kitchen. I don't know why I did it, but it felt instinctive. I opened a drawer and grabbed a butcher's knife. It was heavy in my hand, much heavier than I expected. I had never held it like that before, not as something meant for defense. Holding it made everything feel suddenly very real. This wasn't just fear anymore. This was survival. I went back into the living room and sat down where I could see the front door clearly. My back was straight, my grip tight on the knife. I was terrified, but there was also a strange sense of responsibility settling over me. I was the older brother. If something happened, I felt like it was my job to protect him, even though I had no idea how I would actually do that. The pounding continued. Minutes stretched on endlessly. 5 minutes felt like 20. 10 felt like an hour. My arms started to ache from holding the knife so tightly, but I didn't dare relax my grip. Every bang made me flinch. Every sound made my heart race. I kept waiting for something else to happen, for him to shout, for the door to crack, for the police to show up, for our mom to come home, for anything to change. Nothing did. He just kept pounding. At some point, tears started running down my face, even though I was trying as hard as I could not to cry. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want him to hear anything from inside. I sat there in silence, breathing shallowly, listening to the sound of fists hitting wood. 30 minutes. That's how long it lasted. 30 long, or agonizing minutes of a stranger trying to get into our home. 30 minutes of pure fear, of waiting for something terrible to happen. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence afterward was unbearable. I didn't move. I didn't breathe properly. I just listened. Minutes passed. Nothing. No footsteps. No more banging. No voices. It was like he had vanished. Eventually, our mom came home. I don't remember exactly what happened after that. I know we told her everything. I know she was shaken and angry and scared all at once. I know she checked the locks and hugged us tighter than she ever had before. We never found out who that man was. We never learned why he followed us. We never knew what he wanted or what he planned to do. There was no explanation, no closure, Just that experience, burned into my memory, even now, or years later, it still feels strange to think about. It wasn't like something you see in movies where there's a clear villain or a dramatic ending. It was just fear, stretched out over time, with no answers. That's what made it so unsettling. I still remember sitting there with that knife, feeling way too young to be in that situation, feeling the weight of responsibility and fear at the same time. I remember how small the apartment felt, how thin the door seemed, how quiet everything was except for the pounding. That experience changed something in me. It made me aware, very early on, that danger doesn't always come with warning signs or explanations. Sometimes it shows up silently, follows you home, and tests the strength of a locked door. It was a weird experience, yes, but more than that, it was terrifying. And it's something I've never been able to forget. I was working the graveyard shift at a hotel in Albuquerque at the time, the kind of job where the hours blur together and the building feels like a different world after midnight. During the day, the lobby was full of noise, rolling suitcases, families arguing about directions, and business travelers glued to their phones. At night, it turned into a quiet shell. The lights were dimmed, the air conditioner hummed steadily, and every small sound felt louder than it should. Most nights were painfully slow. I'd sit behind the front desk with a half-finished cup of coffee, flipping through channels on the tiny TV in the corner, or pretending to reorganize paperwork just to stay awake. The only other person in the building who was fully alert was the security guard. He'd do his rounds, then stop by the desk to talk and pass the time. Well, we weren't close friends, but when you work nights with someone, you end up sharing more than you expect. We talked about everything from bad movies to family drama to what we'd do if we ever escaped night shift life. That night felt normal at first. The lobby doors slid open and shut every once in a while as late guests checked in. Around 2 a.m., things went completely dead. The security guard came in from outside, rubbing his hands together because the desert air had turned cold. He leaned against the counter and started complaining about how tired he was. After a few minutes of small talk, he asked me if I could give him a ride home when my shift ended. His place wasn't far from my apartment, and I didn't mind. The problem was, I still had about half an hour left. Normally, I wouldn't have left early, but the night had dragged on forever, and I was exhausted. The thought of getting out of there even a little sooner sounded amazing. I looked around the empty lobby, listened to the silence, and made a decision I knew was stupid but easy. I scribbled a note for my boss saying I had to leave early because my brother was stranded outside of town and needed help. It was a total lie, something dramatic enough that no one would question it. I left the note under the office door, clocked out, and told myself it wasn't a big deal. People left early all the time for worse reasons. We stepped out into the parking lot together. The sky was black and wide, full of stars. Albuquerque at that hour felt like a ghost city. No traffic, no voices, just empty streets stretching in every direction. The security guard thanked me a few times during the drive, talking about how he hated waiting for rides and how I'd saved him a long walk. I dropped him off at his apartment complex, watched him disappear inside, and headed home, feeling relieved to be done with the night. When I got back to my place, I didn't even bother turning on lights. I kicked off my shoes, collapsed into bed, and fell asleep almost instantly. It felt like I'd just closed my eyes when my phone started ringing. The sound cut through my sleep like an alarm. I groaned and fumbled around on the nightstand, squinting at the screen. It was my brother. I answered with that half-awake irritation you get when someone calls too early. Before I could even say hello properly, he started talking fast. He sounded stressed and out of breath, and he told me he was stranded outside of town and needed a ride. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. My brain replayed the lie I'd written in that note at work, the exact words. I had said my brother was stranded outside of town and needed me to get him. Hearing him say the same thing felt like reality had glitched. I actually laughed at first because it was such a bizarre coincidence. I told him what I'd done. I explained the lie, word for word, and how creepy it was that he'd just repeated it back to me without knowing. I expected him to laugh too, or brush it off. Instead, he went quiet for a second and then said that wasn't the weird part. His voice had changed. There was a nervous edge to it that made my stomach tighten. He told me to just come get him and that he'd show me what was weird when I arrived. The drive felt longer than it should have. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon with a pale orange glow. My mind kept circling the coincidence, trying to make it smaller, more reasonable. Brothers get stranded. People need rides, it happens. But the exact phrasing kept echoing in my head, stranded outside of town. The same words, the same story I had invented hours earlier. When I reached him, he was standing by his car on the side of the road, arms crossed against the cold morning air. His vehicle had broken down in a stretch of desert highway where there was nothing but dirt and scrub brush for miles. He got into my car without his usual jokes or sarcasm. He looked rattled. I asked him what he meant about showing me something weird. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and told me to listen. He pressed it against my ear and hit play on a saved voicemail. The recording crackled for a second, full of static. Then a voice came through. It didn't sound human in a normal way. It was flat and distorted, like a cheap text-to-speech program mixed with a whisper. The words were slow and deliberate. "You're stuck." That was it. No background noise, no breathing. Just those two words, stretched and warped in a way that made my skin crawl. The message ended with a click. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at him. A cold feeling spread through my chest. He told me he'd woken up to that message that morning. No missed calls from a normal number, just a blocked entry in his call log. He had no idea who sent it. He hadn't told anyone he was driving out there. He hadn't even realized his car would break down until it happened. We sat there in silence for a moment, the empty road stretching ahead of us. The air felt heavy. I replayed the voice in my mind and felt the same chill all over again. It wasn't just creepy because it sounded strange. It was the timing. The message matched the situation too perfectly. He was stranded. I had lied about him being stranded. And somewhere between those two moments, that message had appeared. We tried to joke about it on the drive back, but the humor felt forced. Every explanation we came up with fell apart under its own weight. A prank didn't make sense. None of our friends had his new number yet. A wrong number didn't explain the words. Even if it was random, the odds of that specific phrase landing at that specific time were hard to swallow. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I kept checking my phone like I expected another message to show up. My brother did the same. Nothing else came. No follow-up, no clue, no trace of where the call originated. It was like it had dropped into existence just long enough to deliver those two words and then vanish. I went back to work the next night and saw the note I'd written still taped to the office door. My boss had scribbled, "Hope everything's okay," underneath it. Seeing my own handwriting made the whole thing feel real again. I stood there for a long time, staring at the sentence about my brother being stranded, feeling a knot twist in my stomach. I never told anyone at work what actually happened. I just nodded and said thanks and went back to the desk. The lobby looked the same as it always did. The same lights, the same humming air conditioner, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brushed up against something I didn't understand, something that had echoed my lie back into the world and made it real. To this day, my brother still has that voicemail saved. Every once in a while we'll bring it up and listen to it again, hoping time will make it less unsettling. It never does. The voice still sounds wrong. The words still land heavy. I've had strange things happen in my life since then, but nothing has matched the sharp, personal chill of that moment. It wasn't just a creepy message. It felt like a warning or a joke told by something that knew more than it should. And the worst part isn't that we never found an explanation. It's that a small part of me isn't sure I want one. Some mysteries feel safer left exactly where they are, sitting in the dark, reminding you that the world doesn't always follow the rules you think it does. I've got two experiences that have stayed with me for years, the kind that sit in the back of your mind no matter how much time passes. The first one happened about a month after my spouse and I got married. We were in that stage where everything still felt new and fragile and exciting, and we slept hard every night because life was busy and happy. One night, I was completely out, deep asleep, when I jolted upright like someone had physically pulled me out of a dream. My heart was racing. I grabbed my spouse and shook them awake. I was crying before I even knew why. I kept saying there was blood everywhere. I could see it like a memory instead of a dream. A car was pulled over on the side of the road, hazard lights flashing. The image was painfully specific. I could see the shape of the vehicle, the stretch of road, even the license plate. German plates. There had been an accident and someone needed help. The urgency in my chest felt real, like if we didn't move right then, something terrible would happen. My spouse tried to calm me down, telling me it was just a nightmare. They held my shoulders and kept repeating that I was safe, that we were home, but I couldn't let it go. The picture in my head didn't fade the way dreams usually do. It stayed sharp and steady. I insisted we had to go. I begged until my voice went hoarse. Finally, just to settle me, they agreed. We got dressed in silence and drove out into the night. The roads were empty and dark, the kind of quiet that makes headlights feel too bright. I guided them almost without thinking, telling them where to turn, where to slow down. I wasn't guessing. And I knew where we were going in the same way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. When we reached the stretch of road from my vision, my stomach dropped. There, exactly where I'd seen it, was a car with German plates pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking, the same rhythm I'd seen in my head. We stopped behind it and got out, both of us suddenly wide awake. The air felt cold and thin. My hands were shaking. The car was empty. No driver, no passengers, no blood, no sign of a struggle, just an abandoned vehicle ticking softly as it cooled. If there had been an accident, it was already over. If someone needed help, someone else had gotten there first. We stood there staring at it, the reality of the car clashing with the impossible way I'd known it would be there. We eventually got back in our own car and drove home without saying much. The adrenaline drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow, stunned feeling. Even now, I can't explain how I saw it before we ever left the house. The image had been too exact to dismiss as coincidence. My spouse didn't try to explain it either. We just carried it quietly between us. The second experience happened not long after our first child was born. We were living in Italy at the time because my spouse was in the Air Force, and we'd flown back to the States so our families could meet the baby. Between the travel and the time difference, I was completely jet-lagged. That first night, I crashed early in a front bedroom while my spouse went out with siblings to catch up. Sometime deep in the night, I woke to the sound of someone entering the room. I opened my eyes and saw a woman walking toward the bed. She moved calmly, like she belonged there. The hallway light framed her for a moment before she stepped fully into the darkness of the room. I remember noticing how tall she was, how long her white hair fell over her shoulders. She wore a blue dress that looked old-fashioned but neat. She sat gently on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped under her weight. I felt it. That's what made the fear spike in my chest. This wasn't a vague shadow or a dream figure. The physical sensation anchored her in reality. I was terrified, but her face was soft, kind. She leaned close and whispered for me to be quiet, that everything was okay. Her voice was warm, reassuring in a way that cut through my panic. She said she just wanted to welcome me to the family. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. I assumed she must be a relative, maybe someone I hadn't met yet. The house was full of extended family visiting for the baby. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. She smiled and stood, walking to the bassinet beside the bed. She looked down at my daughter for a long moment. Then she turned back to me and asked if the baby was mine. I told her yes. She said my daughter was beautiful and that it was lovely to meet both of us. Her words were simple, but the way she said them carried a strange weight, like a formal introduction that mattered more than I understood. Then she walked out. The room fell silent again. I lay there frozen, listening to her footsteps fade. Eventually exhaustion dragged me back to sleep, but the memory sat sharp in my mind even as I drifted off. In the morning, as sunlight made everything feel normal and small. The fear from the night seemed distant, but the memory didn't blur the way dreams do. I brought it up casually at breakfast, asking who the woman was who came into my room. I expected someone to laugh and say an aunt or a cousin had checked on the baby. Instead, everyone stared at me. No one knew what I was talking about. I described her as clearly as I could. Tall, long white hair, blue dress. As I spoke, my mother-in-law's expression changed. The color drained from her face. She stood up without a word and went into another room. The table had gone completely quiet. I remember the sound of dishes and distant voices from the kitchen, everything feeling oddly far away. She came back holding an old photograph. Her hands were shaking slightly as she slid it across the table toward me. The woman in the picture was the one who had sat on my bed. Same hair, same face. The recognition hit me instantly, a cold certainty. I told her yes, that was her. My mother-in-law sat down slowly and said it was her mother. She had been dead for 20 years. They had buried her in a blue dress. No one spoke after that. The air felt thick, like the room had shrunk. I looked down at my daughter in my arms and felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. Whatever had come into that room hadn't meant harm. If anything, it felt protective, welcoming. But the impossibility of it settled into me like a weight. Both of those moments live in my memory with the same clarity as any ordinary day. I can still feel the panic of waking up to that vision of the car. I can still feel the dip of the mattress when the woman sat beside me. I've tried to explain them away 100 times. Stress, exhaustion, coincidence. The mind is powerful and strange, but explanations don't erase the feeling of standing on that roadside, staring at a car I'd already seen, or the certainty of recognizing a face in a photograph I should never have known. They're the kind of experiences that don't ask to be solved. They just stay with you, quiet and unresolved, reminding you that the world is sometimes wider and stranger than we're comfortable admitting. I was 16, the kind of age where you feel almost grown up, like you can handle anything. That day, my little brother and I were home alone. Our parents had gone out for a few hours, and the house felt quiet, empty in a way that was supposed to be peaceful. We had our dog, a golden retriever who had been part of the family for 7 years. He was old by dog standards, calm, sleepy, and never once had he been aggressive. We trusted him completely. He was family. At first, everything seemed normal. My brother was playing around the living room, and the dog was curled up in his favorite spot on the floor, eyes barely open. I was upstairs doing something unimportant, maybe scrolling on my phone or listening to music. I heard nothing out of the ordinary, no warning bells, nothing to indicate that anything was about to go horribly wrong. Then it happened. My brother got a little too close to the dog. He didn't mean anything by it. He just wanted to pet him, maybe ruffle his fur a bit. That should have been harmless. It had been harmless thousands of times before. But something triggered in the dog that day. Maybe he was startled from sleep. Maybe something in his mood shifted in that instant. I'll never know exactly. All of a sudden, the dog snapped. And when I say snapped, I mean violently, uncontrollably, terrifyingly. He latched onto my brother's face. Blood erupted instantly. My brother's screams filled the house, high-pitched, panicked, utterly raw. I froze at first, my mind unable to process the horror I was witnessing. My stomach dropped, my chest tightened, and for a brief moment I felt paralyzed, unable to move, like the entire world had stopped except for the sound of my brother screaming and the sickening tearing of flesh. Then adrenaline hit. I snapped out of it and ran to grab anything I could use to help him. Towels, blankets, anything that could soak up the blood and stop him from losing even more. Blood was everywhere, covering the floor, his hands, his face. I pressed towels to his wounds, desperately trying to control the bleeding, trying to stop the chaos in the house. The dog had finally released him, leaving my brother trembling, bleeding, and in shock. I called 911 as fast as I could, my voice shaking, trying to explain what had happened while simultaneously keeping my brother calm. I held him as best I could while applying pressure to the wounds, trying to reassure him, trying to reassure myself that he would survive, or that we could make it through this. The paramedics arrived quickly. I remember the surreal feeling of seeing them in my living room, calm and professional amidst the chaos, assessing the damage, loading my brother onto a stretcher. The dog was put in another room, quiet and subdued now, as if he knew something terrible had happened. We left the house in a flurry, flashing lights and sirens guiding us to the ER. At the hospital, the reality hit harder. The doctors examined my brother's face, counting the damage, assessing how deep the wounds went. They called a plastic surgeon in. We were told the extent of the injuries: 176 external stitches, 60 internal stitches. Every number was a punch to the gut, a reminder of how badly my brother had been hurt and how close this could have been to permanent, life-altering damage. The surgery took hours. I sat in the waiting room, alone in my fear, thinking about what had just happened. How quickly things could go from ordinary to horrific. How a moment of carelessness or just a split-second misfortune could transform our lives in an instant. I replayed the incident in my head over and over, each time feeling the same panic, the same helplessness, the same terror. When it was finally over, my brother emerged from surgery, bandaged, bruised, and exhausted. The relief was immense, but it didn't erase the horror of the memory. I had seen my brother attacked in a way I never imagined possible. I had felt utterly powerless in that moment, and that feeling stayed with me long after the bleeding stopped and the stitches were in place. The dog, he was eventually forgiven, though the relationship was never quite the same. We had loved him, trusted him, and still do, but the memory of that day hangs over everything. It's a reminder of how fragile safety can be, even at home, even with family pets we trust. A split second changed everything. Even now, years later, thinking about that day brings back the panic, the terror, and the helplessness I felt. It was an absolute horror, one that I will never forget. It's not the kind of story you tell lightly because it's raw, painful, and reminds you of just how quickly ordinary life can turn into a nightmare. It was close to Halloween, the time of year when every conversation somehow drifts toward ghost stories and creepy memories. A few friends and I were sitting around late one night doing exactly that, trying to outdo each other. Most of the stories were the usual exaggerated stuff, things that sounded scary in the moment but fell apart if you thought about them too hard. Then one of my friends said she had a story about her parents' first date. She hesitated before starting. She said she didn't like telling it because it wasn't just a spooky tale. According to her parents, it actually happened. That warning alone was enough to pull all of us in. We pushed her to continue, promising we wouldn't interrupt. Her parents' date had been awkward but sweet in the way first dates often are. Dinner, small talk, the kind of polite nervousness that makes every silence feel longer than it is. When the night was winding down and it was time to say goodnight, her dad suggested something unexpected. He asked if she wanted to go on a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. It sounded spontaneous and a little reckless, but he knew the area well. He'd done rock climbing there before and was confident about the trails. So they drove to the mouth of the canyon and parked. It was a new moon, so the sky was dark, lit mostly by stars. Once they stepped away from the road, the world shrank into shadows and faint outlines. The air was cool, the kind that carries sound in a strange way. Every footstep felt louder than it should have. They started up the trail with no flashlights, letting their eyes adjust to the darkness. At some point, her dad started to feel uneasy. He couldn't explain why. The path ahead curved under a cluster of trees, and that section looked like a solid wall of black. It was late, they were isolated, and the quiet felt wrong. He later described it as a heavy, crawling sensation in his chest, like his body was trying to tell him something his brain hadn't caught up to yet. Still, he didn't want to look scared on a first date, so he ignored it and kept walking. Years later, when they talked about that night, her mom admitted she felt the same thing at almost the exact same moment. She didn't know the trail like he did, but the darkness under those trees bothered her. The canyon had gone strangely still. No insects buzzing, no rustling in the brush, nothing. Just the sound of their breathing and shoes on dirt. They walked closer. The bad feeling faded just enough for him to convince himself it was nerves. Then it came back, stronger. He stepped under the trees, and his foot hit something in the middle of the path. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a branch. It gave under his weight in a way that immediately set off alarm bells in his head. He described it as soft and wrong, something that didn't belong on a trail. It was too dark to see what it was. The unease surged into full fear. He froze, and her mum grabbed his arm. Neither of them wanted to crouch down and touch whatever he'd stepped on. The silence around them felt suffocating, like the canyon itself was holding its breath. Without saying much, they made the same decision at the same time. They turned around and left as fast as they could without running. They didn't look back. They reached the car, got in, and drove away with that shared understanding that something about the situation had been deeply wrong. They laughed it off nervously, chalking it up to imagination and darkness. First date jitters mixed with an eerie setting. It became one of those stories they told as a strange memory, something unsettling but explainable. Years passed. They got married. Life moved on. Then, one night, they were watching a television interview with Ted Bundy. The program asked him about the moment he came closest to being caught. Bundy calmly described a night in Provo Canyon. He talked about luring a young woman there and killing her. As he told it, just after he left her body on a trail, he heard voices approaching. He said he slipped into the trees and hid, expecting to be discovered at any second. Instead, he watched a couple walk up the path. According to him, the man walked directly into the body in the dark. Bundy said he was sure they would find it, sure everything was over. But after a brief pause, the couple turned around and walked away. He described his disbelief as they disappeared down the trail, leaving him hidden and untouched. My friend said her parents just sat there, staring at the screen when they heard that. The canyon, the timing, the detail about someone stepping into the body. It lined up too perfectly with the night of their first date. The soft thing on the path. The crushing sense that they shouldn't be there. They realized they hadn't just been scared of the dark. They had stumbled onto a fresh crime scene with a killer hiding somewhere nearby, watching them. The thought that he had been close enough to hear their footsteps or to see their outlines under the trees haunted them. If they'd turned on a flashlight, if they'd crouched down to investigate, if they'd hesitated even a little longer, the story might have ended very differently. My friend said her parents later talked about the silence in the canyon that night, how the insects seemed to vanish, how the air felt charged, like before a storm. People who heard their story had theories. Maybe Bundy's presence disturbed the wildlife. Maybe the couple subconsciously picked up on faint sounds of movement in the trees. Maybe it was a primitive survival instinct kicking in, the same way animals sense a predator before they see it. Whatever it was, something told them to leave. Sitting there listening to my friend tell it, the room had gone completely quiet. No one cracked jokes, and no one tried to one-up the story. The scariest part wasn't just the brush with a serial killer. It was how close they came to ignoring that warning feeling. How easily curiosity could have pulled them forward instead of back. Her parents always said that night taught them to trust their instincts. Fear isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's your mind putting pieces together faster than you can explain. A dark trail, a silent canyon, a shape on the ground that shouldn't be there. All those details added up to a message their bodies understood, even if their thoughts didn't. They walked away alive because they listened. Even years later, my friend said her mum still gets chills thinking about it. Not because of the killer's face or the headline or the history, but because of that single step into the darkness and the soft thing underfoot. A moment suspended between ignorance and knowledge, between safety and something final. And the idea that somewhere in those trees, hidden and breathing quietly, someone was watching them choose to leave. Growing up, there was a sound in my childhood home that became so familiar it almost felt normal, even though it never should have been. Early in the mornings, before anyone was really awake, I would hear typing coming from the computer downstairs. Not slow pecking at keys, but fast, confident touch typing, the kind of rapid clatter that sounds like someone working under pressure. At first I didn't question it. My parents both worked from home, and it wasn't unusual to wake up to the sound of my mum already at the computer getting a head start on the day. The noise blended into the routine of the house. I'd lie in bed half awake, listening to the steady rhythm of keys and the occasional aggressive clicking of the mouse. Sometimes it sounded frantic, like whoever was using it was frustrated, hammering through emails or fighting with a program that wouldn't cooperate. It was oddly comforting in a way, a sign that the day had started and the house was alive. One morning I got up earlier than usual. The typing was already going. I walked to the top of the stairs and called out to my mum, assuming she was downstairs working like always. There was no answer. The typing continued. I frowned and went down to check. The computer room was empty. The chair was pushed in. The monitor was dark. The keyboard sat untouched. The house was silent, except for my own breathing. The typing had stopped the moment I reached the doorway. I stood there for a while, waiting for it to start again, half expecting to catch someone ducking out as a joke. Nothing happened. Eventually I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd been dreaming and carried the sound with me after waking. Brains do strange things when they're half asleep. I went about my day and didn't mention it to anyone, a little embarrassed by how sure I'd been. But then it happened again and again. Over the next few weeks, the sound kept returning, always early, always from downstairs. Always the same rapid typing paired with sharp, irritated mouse clicks. Each time I would freeze in bed, listening. Each time it felt completely real. And each time, if I rushed down to catch whoever was there, the sound would cut off just before I reached the room. After a while, I stopped going to check. I started to worry there was something wrong with me. I was so used to hearing typing in that house that maybe my brain was filling in the silence out of habit, like phantom phone vibrations. But louder and more convincing. I kept quiet about it, not wanting to sound ridiculous. For 6 months the noise came and went, and I carried it alone, half convinced I was slowly losing it. Then, one morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast when I heard my mum call from the top of the stairs. "You're not down there on that computer already?" Her voice was sharp with irritation, the way it gets when she thought I'd snuck downstairs before school. I felt the spoon freeze halfway to my mouth. I walked into the hallway and looked up at her. She was staring down the staircase, frowning. "I thought I heard typing," she said. The relief that hit me was so strong it almost made me laugh. I blurted out everything at once, all the mornings I'd heard it, all the times I'd gone to look and found nothing, the way it always stopped when I got close. My sister, overhearing the conversation, slowly admitted she'd been hearing it too. Regularly. She'd also kept quiet because she thought she was imagining things. Standing there together, the house suddenly felt different. The sound we'd all dismissed as a personal glitch had been happening to each of us, separately, consistently. After that, the typing wasn't just a strange background noise anymore. It was a shared mystery. I became determined to catch it in the act. Whenever I heard it, I'd bolt from my room and sprint to the top of the stairs, where I could see straight into the computer room. Every time I got there, it stopped a split second too soon. The room would sit there perfectly still, innocent, like it had never made a sound. This went on for a couple of years. Not every day, but often enough that we stopped reacting strongly. The house absorbed it into its character. The typing became one of those things we shrugged off because we didn't know what else to do with it. It wasn't threatening, just unsettling, like living next to a train track you can't see. Then, one afternoon, I was actually in the computer room when something happened that shifted the feeling from weird to dangerous. I was standing near the desk when the ceiling light above me started flickering. At first it was a normal flicker, the kind old bulbs do before they burn out. Then it sped up. The flashes became rapid and violent, turning the room into a strobe-lit blur. My stomach dropped instantly. The memory of all those empty mornings and phantom typing rushed back at once. I didn't wait to see what would happen. Fear hit me clean and sharp, and I ran. I had barely crossed the doorway when the bulb exploded behind me. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Glass shattered and rained down across the floor. I turned in the hallway and saw fragments skittering everywhere, glittering in the air before settling. If I'd hesitated even a second longer, I would have been standing directly underneath it. That rattled me more than I wanted to admit. A broken light bulb can be explained. Old wiring, faulty glass, bad luck. But the timing wrapped itself around everything else that had been happening in that room. The typing, the silence, the feeling of being watched when I stood there alone. Around the same time, I had the moment that made me swear I'd never willingly be alone in that room again. I was sitting at the computer by myself, the house empty and quiet. The screen glowed in front of me, the hum of electronics filling the air. I was focused on whatever I was doing when I felt it. A breath. Right behind my right shoulder, close enough that I felt the air move against my ear. A sharp intake, like someone leaning in to speak. It was unmistakable, Not a creak, not the house settling, a human breath. Every muscle in my body locked for half a second. My brain refused to process what it meant. Then adrenaline took over. I was out of the chair and through the doorway before the thought even finished forming. I don't remember my feet touching the floor. I just remember being in the hallway with my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The house was empty. I checked anyway, every room, every corner, my hands shaking. There was no one there. The silence felt enormous. I stood in the hallway staring at the computer room, half expecting to see someone step out casually and apologize for the joke. Nothing moved. After that, the typing wasn't funny or curious anymore. It had crossed into something personal, something that had stood close enough to breathe on my neck. Even now, thinking about it makes my shoulders tense. I avoided that room whenever I could. If I had to use the computer, I made sure someone else was in the house. What's strange is that I've never experienced anything like it since leaving that home. No phantom sounds, no unexplained moments. Just a stretch of years where the ordinary rules of noise and presence didn't seem to apply inside those walls. I don't claim to know what it was. I've tried to file it under electrical quirks, acoustics, imagination, our shared suggestion. None of the explanations fit perfectly, but I still reach for them because the alternative is harder to hold. All I know is that for a long time, in a perfectly normal suburban house, something typed furiously at a computer no one was touching, shattered a light above my head, and breathed in my ear when I was alone. And even though I don't consider myself someone who believes in ghosts, there's a part of me that still listens carefully in quiet houses, half expecting to hear fingers racing across keys in an empty room. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.